Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of your celebration at St. Thomas Wesley as you get ready to close this chapter of the congregation's life. My name is Sheila Mckinnon. I came to St. Thomas Wesley in the summer of 1986. I had been ordained in 1980 in Peterborough, Ontario, after graduating from Queen's University, Kingston. I always said I didn't know how to spell Saskatchewan or find Lanigan on a map until I lived there. After 6 years on my ordinand charge, I was called by St. Thomas Wesley. The head of that committee was Wes Gross, and Wes and Edna were very kind to me. I had dinner at their house before I even became a resident of Saskatoon. 75 miles isn't far to travel, but it was a very different world from rural Lanigan. St. Thomas Wesley was very much an inner city church at a time of tremendous transition for that neighborhood. Anna Hennick still lived over a store across the street, but there were also increasing numbers of pawn shops as the neighborhood changed. Our congregation's relationship with the Friendship Inn and the kids at Princess Alexandra School was very important. So I've been given some questions asking, how did the church influence me as a person? Well, in 1,000 different ways. I was very blessed to be there for 7 years. And when I left, I went to St. Andrew's Wesley. I always said it was like working for cousins, but it was another large city church, but in a different time, different place in Vancouver. I followed Gary Redmond, the Reverend Dr. Gary, went back to teach at Toronto at Emmanuel College. Gary had followed Cliff McMurtry, a well-known family of ministers in Saskatchewan. And I think I've got it right. The Cliff followed Hart Cantillon. I got to meet all these ministers when I was there. And in fact, Hart Cantillon's son, the Reverend Bill Cantillon, serves in ministry maybe 5 miles from where I'm speaking right now this morning. We've enjoyed connecting and remembering those days. So many things I was asked, what are my memories? Well, working at 20th and H was really quite something. Like the sanctuary I'm in now, the focal point was the organ. It was a memorial organ from the First World War. But the sanctuary was painted pale blue, like inside of a Frigidaire fridge. And I think once, but you'll have the right number there, it might have been twice, the inside was painted in my 7 years. The watchful eye of volunteers over a wonderful gang of volunteers from the correctional service. And they were glad to get out and paint. The legislation has changed. I don't think that's even possible anymore, but it was great to see them. And of course, for us, what a boon to have our paint refreshed. There were so many volunteers associated with that congregation. That's really my memory. But before I talk about the lay people around me, I would just say that one of the things that was a real gift to me when I arrived in Saskatchewan was Saskatoon Presbytery. Now, it's gone, but Irving Fraser up at Humboldt was just such a mentor and friend for me the whole time I was in Saskatchewan, Irving and his wife, Carol. I worked at St. Thomas Wesley with Sonia and Betty. Sonia in the office, Betty in the caretaker. They looked after me and the church and all of our congregation as if we were family. It was a real gift to work with those two. The associate minister was Chuck McNutt, the Reverend Chuck McNutt. And one of the funniest things Chuck ever said to me was he said one day he had just come back from an organ recital. Like at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I started saying, Chuck, where were you? He said he named the person he'd been visiting at least, and how they'd gone through their whole body, organ by organ. And, like this is happening in my liver, my kidneys. And ever since then, I hear people launch off on those conversations. I think, Chuck should hear this organ recital. So he was a great teammate. We also had Val Stubbs as our social worker. Val taught me so much about life in the inner city and how to be in ministry. Val came to us from the north end of Winnipeg, and I know that her sister ran a large Catholic organization in the States, but she was such a teacher. Val and I both quit smoking while we were at Thomas Wesley. That was hell for both of us. I remember one day saying to Val, how was it going? And we agreed this was the hardest thing we'd ever done. I had the support and friendship of three couples other than Irving and Carol. And they were, I'm sure that some of them are gone now. Maybe one or two of them are left. I don't know. I know Wendell and Velma Stevens. Wendell had actually served out here at Lynn Valley in North Vancouver for a while. Dale and Mildred Morrison. He was at McClure. And Dawn and Donna Bars. Dawn was in ministry with Wendell. Right near us was Oliver Lodge, which was important to us. In those days, ministers still went and did services in lodges. And I think we went out to something called Sherbrooke at Christmas time and sang. And then Oliver Lodge was just down the street. Special memories for us as a congregation in that period of 7 years would go from surviving the crisis of 1988 with the decision to affirm self-declared practicing homosexual persons, and at a national level, and the fire of Mayfair United Church when it burned to the ground just down the street from us. We were at 20th and H, and they were at, I think, H 33rd. I've never lived again in a city that had streets named like that, but I always loved it that I had to rush home and pee, because that was actually my literal address. I lived at the corner of Rush Home and P in a large green manse with this $1 million view. I've heard that manse has since been sold. A lot of fundraising was done in the Ventures for Mission program, and we raised enough money locally for a ramp. Now, I hope that ramp is still there because I think we overbuilt that ramp, but we didn't have one before, and while I was there was the International Year of Handicapped People. And so we put in this solid ramp going into the sanctuary. And in that sanctuary was the artistry of Velma Stevens. Her liturgical fabric art was such a gift. And I remember her willingness and her creativity, her husband, Art. Their daughter was one of the teachers, I think, in the Sunday school. We had a fairly hefty history of Sunday school, especially with the Chinese population back in the day, when Thomas Wesley was a huge congregation with a huge Sunday school. But there was still a fun Sunday school when I was there. I remember also there were art classes being held in the basement, and a couple at least of UCW groups. But we also had Ukrainian dance school. I don't know if they were still there, but it was the most wonderful thing that when school got out, suddenly our whole building was filled with this fabulous music and kids wearing red boots. So it says here, can you tell us a little about special people that I still miss? I almost hate to name them because I'm afraid I'll forget somebody and I'll wake up tomorrow morning at 3 a.m. thinking, oh, I forgot. But one of the most important people was Helena Moore. Helena was at one point the church secretary long before I got there. She was willing to mentor me in the most practical way. She never, ever called me anything except Miss McKinnon. And she wrote to me typewritten letters after I left before her death that always said Miss McKinnon. Wes Gross passed away while I was there. He was a tremendous loss because he was such a leader and a very, very committed Christian. Lillian Cameron led that art class. And then there were the people who did like Burl and Elaine that did the Church and Society, but I think my note says that they did a separate document, so I won't mention anything more about them. Worship was really a big focus, and I was so pleased when I got here to Victoria to find Tanya Miller involved here in our symphony. She was one of the students at, I guess, her final year when she was our organist. And I did her wedding on Bowen Island when I was a minister there with all these fabulous people from Juilliard, where I guess she'd gone, and she'd done her master's in Chicago, or master's or her doctorate in Chicago. Other musicians were Mary Wedgwood And I apologize. I don't remember if Brian's last name was Sweet or Sweetman. He was the organist when I got there. Finally, they've asked what was I proudest about. I think I was proudest about how we changed and how we endured. We had a beautiful choir. Some of those people had sung in that choir for 30 years. That was fabulous. What a gift. Week after week they were there. But we were changing. The United Church was changing and our neighborhood was changing. And our congregation began to move more into the community. And this is what I believe churches are called to do in the future. We are called not to be like the prodigal father waiting for the son to come home, but we're called to be like the woman looking for the coin, going out with her broom, going out to find what we can do that's useful. So that was a great influence to me in my spirituality, my journey. I have just served 20 years in a rural charge, and I'm now in my 4th year here in the poorest neighborhood of Victoria. And so many of the lessons that I learned at St. Thomas Wesley still are relevant for me. So huge thanks to Connie and Erwin for inviting me to be part of your reflection. Connie and Erwin were not just part of the congregation, but were my neighbors, and they loved gardening. I'll never forget that. So God bless you as you prepare for this next chapter. I know that closing is a hard thing to do, but what a wonderful history you leave behind, a proud legacy of faith and service. Thanks again.